The airport security camera would later show 3 people standing near Gate 47. A woman in a burgundy coat, a man in an expensive suit holding an encrypted drive, and another man who was supposed to be blind. But Nadine Okafor wasn't looking at the cameras. She was looking at Kang Juwon's face as he realized his confession had been recorded, his escape route blocked, and his carefully orchestrated betrayal turned inside out. "You set me up," Juwon whispered, his voice cracking like thin ice. Nadine's response was steady as law. "No, you set yourself up. I just refused to be collateral damage." Behind her, Ro Geonwoo stood without his bandage, without his cane, without the blindness he'd worn like armor for 2 weeks. His eyes, sharp, seeing, devastated, fixed on her face. "I knew you weren't blind," Nadine said quietly, turning to meet his gaze. "The question is, did you know I knew?" The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Departure announcements echoed through the terminal. And 3 lives hung in the balance of a truth that would either destroy them or set them free. Nadine Okafor had never been afraid of silence. She'd grown up with it. Sunday mornings before church, when her mother braided her hair into neat cornrows and let the radio hum low in the kitchen, the hush that fell over their apartment in East Vancouver whenever a bill came due and everyone started thinking instead of talking, the quiet patience it took to become the kind of woman who didn't flinch when a room tried to shrink her. By 2025, Nadine's silence had become a skill. She listened for what people didn't say. That's why her job fit her like tailored wool. She worked in compliance and risk, anti-money laundering and corporate transparency for a consulting firm that got called in when business owners needed their books to survive scrutiny. It was clean, legitimate work. It also put her close enough to power to feel its heat. And that's how she met Ro Geonwoo. The first time wasn't romantic. It was fluorescent and formal, a conference room overlooking Cole Harbour where the ocean looked like a screensaver. Geonwoo sat at the head of the table as if the chair had been built around him. He didn't introduce himself with bravado. He introduced himself with clarity. "My company is being audited," he said in calm English, the slightest edge of soul still living in his vowels. "I want to pass. I want it done correctly." Nadine had asked what he did. He'd looked at her for a beat too long, like he was deciding how honest he could be with a woman who saw through varnish. "Logistics," he'd said. "Hospitality. Investment." She'd nodded, flipping open her laptop. "Then you'll need more than clean statements. You'll need clean systems." Something in his expression had shifted. Not charm, not a smile. Recognition. As if he'd spent years being surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear, and suddenly someone had told him what would actually work. After that, they kept meeting. Meetings turned into late-night calls. Calls turned into dinners. Always public, always respectful. He never grabbed her wrist, never crowded her space, never treated her like a prize for surviving his attention. He asked questions the way a man asked questions when he cared about the answers. "What do you do when you're not working?" he'd asked once, watching her pick at scallion pancakes in a small Korean diner off Robson Street. "I'm with my people," Nadine had replied. "My mum, my cousins, Auntie Ifeoma. We cook, we argue, we pretend we're not sentimental." He'd nodded slowly. "That sounds loud." "Loud is love," she'd said, and surprised herself when his mouth curved. Small, real, gone too fast. Her friends had warned her, of course. Malik Dorsey, her closest friend since university, now a cybersecurity analyst with an instinct for disaster, had narrowed his eyes the first time Nadine said Geonwoo's name. "You know who he is," Malik had said flatly. "I know what he shows me," Nadine answered. "That's the problem," Malik muttered. "Men like that are professional editors." Nadine had held her line anyway, not because she was naive, but because Geonwoo had never asked her to stop being herself. He respected her boundaries like they were law, not inconvenience. So when, on a rain-heavy February night, Geonwoo called her with a voice that sounded too controlled, Nadine didn't expect the lie. "Come over," he said. "Now." "You don't call me now like that," Nadine replied, already pulling on her coat. "What happened?" A pause. A breath. "I need you." he said quietly. "And I need you steady." When she arrived at his penthouse, glass, dark wood, a view that made Vancouver look like it belonged to him, she found a different man than the one who'd learned her tea order and remembered to keep coconut water in the fridge, because she said it helped when she was stressed. Jeon-woo stood in the middle of the living room with a matte black wrap tied across his eyes. Not a fashion statement, not a playful blindfold, something that looked medical and final. Nadine froze. "Jeon-woo, what is that?" His hands were still, palms open at his sides, as if he didn't want to startle her. "A complication," he said. "Temporary." Nadine's heart punched once. Her mind immediately began rearranging his entire home into safety. Sharp corners, glass tables, stairs, the too-slick marble strip by the balcony door. "Did you see a doctor?" she demanded. "A real one, not one your people found." His jaw flexed. "Yes." "Are you blind?" Another pause, too measured. "Yes," Jeon-woo said. Nadine stared at him, and something in her chest went quiet in a way she didn't like. She had spent her life around people who lied with their whole bodies. She knew the rhythm of a practiced answer. Still, she stepped forward, because disability was not a morality test. It was reality, and Nadine refused to treat it like punishment. "Okay," she said, grounding her voice. "Then we adapt. Tell me what you need." Jeon-woo's head angled toward her. "Guide me," he said. Nadine swallowed. She approached carefully and offered her arm the way she'd learned from accessibility workshops she'd helped fund at her church. Consent first, clear movement, no infantilizing. "Take my forearm," she said, light grip. His fingers wrapped around her sleeve, gentle, controlled. He didn't cling. He followed. As she guided him to the kitchen, she narrated the space. Counter edge, step down, chair to the left. And despite herself, she felt a tender ache. She could be that kind of partner, the kind who didn't run when life got harder. Then the door opened. Kang Ju-won walked in like he owned the air. The next morning, Jeon-woo's penthouse filled with people who moved like they were trained to be quiet. Ju-won arrived first. Immaculate suit, hair perfect, eyes too calm. He was Jeon-woo's right hand, and he greeted Nadine with polite distance that always felt like a measurement. "Ms. Okafor," Ju-won said, "thank you for staying." Nadine's gaze narrowed. "I'm not staying for you." Ju-won's smile barely registered. "Of course not," he agreed. "You're staying for him." The way he said him made Nadine's skin prickle. Lee Sarang, Jeon-woo's in-house counsel, arrived with a folder of urgent documents. Yoon Soyeon, his executive assistant, hovered with a tablet, trying to keep the machine of his life running smoothly while his blindness rewired every routine. Nadine watched them all, and she noticed what Jeon-woo's people didn't. When Jeon-woo couldn't see, others moved differently. They spoke more freely, they leaned closer. They assumed he couldn't catch a glance, and Ju-won started taking liberties. He started redirecting emails, changing schedules, sitting in Jeon-woo's chair when Jeon-woo stepped away to rest. He spoke to Lee Sarang in soft Korean when he thought Nadine couldn't understand more than a word. Nadine understood enough. It wasn't just ambition. It was a takeover wearing manners. "Fintrack is coming in 3 weeks, Jeon-woo told her that afternoon, his voice quiet as they sat on his sofa. An external audit. Someone tipped them with selective information. Nadine's stomach sank. Selective means crafted. "Yes," he said. "Someone wants to cut me without touching me. And you think the answer is pretending to be blind?" Jeon-woo didn't move. "I needed to know who would treat you like leverage if they believed I couldn't protect you." That explanation should have reassured her. Instead, it made her furious. "You used a disability as theater," Nadine said, voice low. "You didn't even ask if I was okay being pulled into this." Jeon-woo's mouth tightened. "You're right," he said. Nadine blinked. Powerful men didn't admit fault quickly, not unless the truth mattered more than pride. Still, she didn't forgive him. Not yet. But she did make her first decisive choice. She stayed long enough to keep control of what she could. "Fine," Nadine said. "If you're going to do this, you do it with rules. 1, no one speaks to me like I'm bait. 2. Your lawyer writes boundaries. 3. I get my friend Malik here tomorrow. He watches your systems. If anyone objects, that's my answer. Geonwoo's jaw flexed. Agreed. Ju-won objected the next morning. Of course he did. When Malik arrived, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, Ju-won met him at the door with a smile that didn't belong to welcome. External consultants are unnecessary, he said. Nadine stepped in, calm as law. Malik isn't here to serve you, she replied. He's here because I said so. Ju-won's eyes slid to Geonwoo, who sat on the sofa with his bandage, cane resting against his knee. Chairman? Geonwoo's voice was steady. Let him in. Ju-won's smile twitched. Malik walked past him with a quiet nod and whispered to Nadine, That man is radioactive. I know, Nadine murmured back. Stay close. For 2 days Geonwoo watched, listening from behind the bandage, mapping voices, tracking footsteps, feeling the power shifts in his own home. Nadine guided him through meetings, reading documents aloud, annotating margins, correcting assumptions. Their closeness became practical, intimate in ways that didn't need a kiss. Once, in the kitchen, Geonwoo reached for a mug and hesitated. Nadine placed her hand lightly on his wrist and said, 2 inches left. He obeyed without pride. Then she realized how rare that was, a man trained to command, choosing to trust. Later, when her hands went cold from anxiety, Geonwoo handed her a small jar from his pantry, plain shea butter, unscented, the kind that said he'd been paying attention. He didn't make a speech. He simply pushed it toward her. Nadine stared at it, startled by the tenderness of something so practical. You keep shea butter? I keep what you reach for when you think no one notices, he said softly. It wasn't a grand gesture, it was intimacy built on observation. But even as warmth spread through her chest, Nadine's mind catalogued inconsistencies. The way Geonwoo's head turned toward sounds before they fully registered. The micro-adjustments he made to avoid obstacles he shouldn't have been able to see. The careful choreography of his movements that felt too practiced for someone newly blind. When trust becomes a weapon and blindness becomes a test, one woman must choose between love and survival. But what happens when the person you're trying to protect is the one deceiving you? Nadine was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. The betrayal scene arrived, slick, neon, and undeniable. Ju-won invited Nadine to a planning meeting in a private Noraebang suite in Coquitlam, claiming it was safer than the penthouse. He insisted Geonwoo needed to attend so the team could feel his presence. Geonwoo arrived in his bandage and dark coat, cane in hand, silent and composed. The suite pulsed with purple-blue light. Mirrors threw reflections everywhere. A bowl of fruit and expensive whiskey sat untouched. It looked like pleasure. It felt like a trap. Nadine stepped in and immediately understood. This was meant to be seen. Ju-won closed the door behind them and leaned closer than he ever had. You're carrying a lot, he murmured. A man who can't even see you. Nadine's stomach twisted. She glanced toward Geonwoo, who sat on the sofa in the corner, head angled as if listening. Ju-won smiled, reading the room wrong on purpose. You could have stability, he said, voice low. Someone who understands how power works. Nadine kept her face controlled. You're offering me what, exactly? Ju-won stepped closer, letting the neon paint his cheekbones like sin. A future, he said, with the right person. He reached out and touched her wrist. Nadine didn't yank away. She didn't freeze either. She did something colder. She let him believe he was winning. She made her second decisive choice. She seduced him, precisely enough to bait truth, not to betray herself. Nadine smiled slowly and stepped into his space. She slid her fingers up his tie and tugged the knot, gentle as a promise. Ju-won's breath hitched. He leaned closer, smug with entitlement. Behind them, Geonwoo turned his head slightly, still as stone. Nadine's voice dropped into a purr that would haunt the replay in anyone's mind. If you want me, she whispered, be honest with me. Ju-won's eyes glittered. Finally, he murmured. Nadine's hand rested against his chest, a heartbeat away from a kiss. Tell me who tipped Fintrack, she said softly. Tell me who wants him gone. Juwon's mouth curved. He's already gone, he said. He just doesn't know it yet. Nadine's smile stayed. She tugged his tie again closer. Say it, she whispered. Say what you did. Juwon's voice dropped, pleased with himself. I moved the numbers, he admitted. I fed them what they needed. I made sure the audit lands like a guillotine, and when he falls, I take everything clean. The word clean made Nadine's stomach turn. It wasn't about justice. It was about control. Juwon's hand slid to her waist like he owned the right. Come with me, he murmured. You don't have to be loyal to a man who can't see. Nadine laughed softly, as if flattered. Maybe I'm not loyal, she said. From the corner, Jae-woo's jaw tightened so hard Nadine could see it even from across the room. Juwon leaned in, confident, and Nadine let him, almost. Their mouths hovered close enough for the camera in anyone's mind to scream betrayal. That image was the trap, the scandal, the apparent end. Then Nadine pulled back a fraction and slipped a hotel keycard into Juwon's jacket pocket with a smile. Later, she whispered. Juwon looked victorious. Jae-woo sat rigid in the corner, blind, silent, absorbing what looked like heartbreak. Nadine walked out first, chin high, leaving the impression exactly where Juwon wanted it. She was switching sides. Malik met her in the hallway, eyes wide. Nadine, what the hell was that? Nadine didn't answer. She only said, drive. But as they walked away, she caught something in her peripheral vision that made her blood run cold. Through the suite's glass door, she saw Jae-woo's head turn to track their movement. A man who was truly blind wouldn't have been able to follow their exit so precisely. The realization hit her like ice water. Jae-woo wasn't just testing his people's loyalty. He was testing hers, and she had just given him exactly what he was looking for, or so he thought. Over the next week, the betrayal narrative spread inside Jae-woo's organization like a virus. Whispers followed Nadine. Yoon So-yeon wouldn't meet her eyes. Lee Sarang watched her like she might be a liability. Even Jae-woo, when alone with her, kept his voice steady but distant, as if he was rehearsing how to survive her absence. Nadine let him believe it. Because the real plot was not romance. It was leverage. Fintrack's audit date moved up. Suddenly, conveniently. Juwon had pushed it. The pressure tightened. Jae-woo's legitimate businesses were on the brink of public collapse, and if they collapsed, the shadows behind them would spill into the open. And Nadine, by appearing to betray him, had been placed right where she needed to be, inside the enemy's confidence. Juwon began texting her. Casual, smug, possessive, invitations, updates, proof of movement. Malik catalogued everything legally, carefully, building a timeline the way you built a case. Clean, undeniable, impossible to spin. Jae-woo still wore the bandage around others. The performance continued. The tension between him and Nadine sharpened into something almost unbearable, because their love was real, even when the suspicion wasn't. One night after a brutal meeting, Nadine guided Jae-woo through his penthouse hallway. His hand hovered near the wall, and she could feel his restraint. He wanted to grab her, demand truth, demand reassurance. Instead, he whispered, "If you're leaving, tell me." Nadine's throat tightened. She lifted his hand and placed it gently on the back of a chair, guiding him. "2 steps," she said, voice steady. "I'm asking as a man," Jae-woo said quietly. "Not as your boss." Nadine stopped. Her chest ached. "I'm not leaving," she said, careful, because it was the truth wrapped in strategy. "Not yet." Jae-woo's breath shuddered. "Tell me what you see," he whispered. Nadine's voice softened. "I see you trying," she said. "And I see you scared." He swallowed. "I am." It was the closest he came to begging. Nadine couldn't touch his face, not yet, not until the trap closed where she wanted it. But late that night, alone in her apartment, she called Malik with a voice that barely held steady. "He's not blind," she said without preamble. Malik was quiet for a long moment. "You sure?" "He tracks movement through the bandage. He navigates too well." He responds to visual cues he shouldn't be able to see. Nadine's voice cracked. He's been testing me this whole time. So what's the play? Malik asked. Nadine stared out her window at the city lights, thinking of Geonwoo's hands when he'd guided her through his kitchen that first night, thinking of the shea butter he'd kept for her, thinking of the way he'd said her name like it was something precious. We test him back, she said quietly, and we make sure when this is over, there's still something real left to save. The next morning brought the crisis that would change everything, Juwon's final move. He'd leaked selective financial records to a journalist at the Vancouver Sun, not enough to implicate himself, but enough to paint Geonwoo as the kind of businessman who laundered money through legitimate fronts. The story would run in 48 hours unless Geonwoo stepped down and transferred his assets to a more stable leadership structure. In other words, to Juwon. The ultimatum arrived via encrypted message while Nadine sat in Geonwoo's living room, watching him pretend to listen to Lee Sarang read legal documents aloud. Geonwoo's face went still when Sarang finished reading the threat. 48 hours, he said quietly. We could fight it, Sarang offered. Injunction, defamation. With what evidence? Geonwoo asked. He's been careful. Nadine felt the weight of the moment settling around them like a net. This was it. The point where everything would either collapse or crystallize into something they could survive. She made her choice. There's another way, she said quietly. Both men turned toward her, Geonwoo's head angled in her direction with that too precise tracking she'd learned to recognize. He thinks I'm his ally now, Nadine continued. He thinks I chose him over you. Let me use that. Geonwoo's voice was carefully controlled. Use it how? Nadine met his bandaged gaze directly. Let me get close enough to make him confess. On record. Somewhere public enough that he can't deny it later. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. Finally, Geonwoo nodded. Do it, he said. But Nadine heard what he didn't say. If you're really betraying me, this is your chance. And she heard her own unspoken response. If you're really testing me, you're about to get your answer. The climax came at Vancouver International Airport, bright, sterile, merciless with time. Juwon was running. He'd booked a last-minute flight to Seoul under a corporate alias, carrying an encrypted drive with the altered audit trail, enough to bury Geonwoo and crown himself in the chaos. He believed Nadine was meeting him at the airport to leave Vancouver behind. He believed his own story. Nadine walked into the terminal with Malik at a distance, hoodie up, camera off, moving like a shadow in a crowd. Her phone buzzed once. Lee Sarang's message, "Are you sure?" Nadine's reply was a single word. Yes. Juwon spotted her near the departures board and smiled like he'd already won. You came, he said, reaching for her elbow. Nadine stepped just out of reach. Where's the drive? She asked. Juwon's smile widened. Safe, he said. You and me first. Nadine's heart hammered, but her face stayed calm. I want to see it. Juwon leaned closer. Trust me. Nadine's eyes held his. No, she said simply. Say you moved the numbers again. Say you tipped Fintrack. Say you planned to frame him. Juwon chuckled. You like hearing me confess? He murmured, amused. Nadine's lips curved. I like honesty. Juwon smiled, and because arrogance is the easiest lure, he said it. Again, cleaner this time, louder, proud. Behind a column, Malik's device captured the audio. Nadine's hands didn't shake. Then Geonwoo appeared, no bandage, no cane, no pretense. He walked up behind Nadine, eyes sharp, heartbreak contained behind discipline. Juwon froze, the first real fear flickering across his face. Chairman, Geonwoo's voice was low, lethal without spectacle. You confessed, he said, in an airport, like a man who thought he was smarter than consequences. Juwon's gaze snapped to Nadine. You set me up. Nadine exhaled slowly. She turned to Geonwoo, meeting his eyes for the first time in a week without walls. And this was the plot twist, delayed, detonating only now. I knew you weren't blind, Nadine said quietly. Geonwoo's breath caught. What? Nadine's voice didn't waver. The first night, she said. You tracked my face through the bandage, a micro-movement. You do it when you're thinking. I didn't call you out because I needed you to keep pretending." Jeonwoo stared at her, stunned. Nadine continued, steady as law. "You were testing me," she said, "so I tested you back. I wanted to see if you'd choose accountability without control, if you'd let me lead the strategy instead of protecting me like property." Jeonwoo's throat worked, and the nori bang. "I baited him," Nadine said. "I didn't betray you. I played the role he wrote for me until he said the truth out loud." Juwon's face twisted. "You used me." Nadine's gaze sharpened, cold with clarity. "No," she said. "You used everyone, workers, companies, him, me. I just refused to be the one left holding the damage." Jeonwoo stepped closer, not to claim her, not to trap her, to stand beside her like he finally understood what partnership meant. Lee Sarang arrived moments later with 2 uniformed airport officers, not a dramatic arrest, not a scene, just procedure. Fintrack had been notified. The evidence was clean. The narrative had nowhere to hide. Juwon's voice rose, angry, pleading, then thin with panic. "Jeonwoo, you can't do this. We handle this internally." Jeonwoo's eyes didn't move. "We don't," he said. "Not anymore." That was his real reform, spoken under fluorescent lights with no romance soundtrack, a choice to stop managing betrayal with silence. When it was over, when Juwon was escorted away, when the drive was secured, when the audit stopped being a guillotine and became what it was supposed to be, a reckoning, Jeonwoo turned to Nadine, eyes raw. "You could have told me," he said. Nadine's voice softened but stayed firm. "And you could have asked," she replied. "You made a test out of trust. I made a structure out of survival." Jeonwoo's shoulders slumped, the first time she'd seen him look truly exhausted. "I'm sorry," he said, simple and unadorned, "for the blindness, for the manipulation, for thinking love can be measured." Nadine studied him. Then she did something small and intimate that felt like a decision. She reached up and adjusted his tie, straightening the knot the way her mother used to straighten her collar before church. Her fingers lingered at his throat, just long enough to make him inhale. "Don't do tests," Nadine said quietly. "Do truths." Jeonwoo nodded, eyes shining with the kind of restraint that meant he wanted to kiss her, but refused to use urgency as pressure. "Truth," he agreed. "Always." Their happy ending didn't arrive as a wedding ring dropped into champagne. It arrived as work. Months later, Nadine stood in the kitchen of her East Vancouver apartment, watching Jeonwoo attempt to flip pancakes without burning them. He'd gotten better at domestic tasks since learning that competence, not control, was what impressed her. "Your mother's coming for dinner Sunday," she reminded him, adjusting the heat under his pan. "I know," he said, smiling. "She wants to interrogate my reform efforts." Iyabo Okafor had taken exactly 1 meeting with Jeonwoo before declaring him a work in progress with potential. It was the closest thing to approval he was likely to get, until he proved himself over years, not months. The changes had been real, not performative. Jeonwoo had cooperated with the investigation where it mattered. He'd let Lee Sarang restructure his legitimate businesses with transparent oversight. He'd cut off operations that relied on exploiting workers' silence. He'd promoted Yoon Soyeon to run internal ethics compliance, something unthinkable before Nadine forced him to see the cost of invisibility. He'd brought Malik in on a legitimate cybersecurity contract, paid fairly, with boundaries written in ink. Nadine kept her career. She didn't become a trophy girlfriend hidden in glass towers. She still went to church on Sundays and still let Auntie Ifeoma fuss over her edges and tell Jeonwoo bluntly, "If you break her heart, God will handle you." Jeonwoo listened, and he didn't laugh it off. Now, as spring light filtered through her kitchen window, Nadine watched him plate breakfast with the careful attention he'd once reserved for business deals. He handed her a cup of ginger tea, the way he'd learned she liked it. Less honey, more heat. "You still see patterns?" he asked quietly. Nadine leaned into his shoulder, allowing the contact because she chose it. "Always," she said. "And what do you see now?" he asked. Nadine looked up at him. I see a man who stopped hiding behind control, she said. I see a partner who doesn't need to be feared to be respected. Jeonwoo swallowed. And do you see us? Nadine's smile was slow, real. Yes, she said, but only if we keep it clean. Jeonwoo nodded once, solemn as a vow. Clean, he repeated. Not the way Ju-won meant it, the way you do. Nadine reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his, not as surrender, not as proof, but as agreement. No more tests, only truth, chosen every day.